It's not that simple.
It actually is simple. If we don't move out, I'm leaving with or without you.
What if the real problem between Jenny and Sumit is not the $20,000 everyone keeps talking about, but the fact that this one number suddenly makes years of old questions feel dangerous again? Because when a couple has already survived catfishing, family pressure, secret decisions, emotional blow-ups, and more second chances than most relationships ever get, a major money surprise does not land like a normal mistake. It lands like a warning. Fans are now looking at this situation and asking one simple question that changes everything. If Jenny did not fully understand what was happening with that money, then what else could she still be learning after all these years? And the strangest part is that the answer may have less to do with where the money went, and much more to do with how Sumit handles the truth when he knows Jenny is not going to like it. That is exactly why this story has people talking. Because $20,000 is large enough to feel serious, but it is also specific enough to make viewers start doing emotional math. Jenny did not just move across town for this relationship, and she did not just give up a comfortable routine for a few months of adventure. She built a huge part of her later life around Sumit, defended him when people called the relationship impossible, stayed when new information came out, and kept believing that every painful chapter was bringing them closer to the peaceful marriage they had been fighting for. So when fans hear the words $20,000 next to the words Jenny did not know, they are not reacting only to money. They are reacting to the possibility that after everything she gave up, Jenny could still be the person receiving important information after the decision has already been made. And before anybody jumps straight to the darkest conclusion, this is where the story gets more interesting. Because Sumit does not have to be some secret mastermind for this situation to become a serious problem. In fact, one of the strongest explanations is almost the opposite. Sumit has always looked like a man who hates painful confrontation so much that he sometimes creates a bigger problem while trying to avoid a smaller one. He seems to convince himself that if he can just solve something first, explain it later, and keep everybody calm in the meantime, then maybe the explosion will never happen. The problem is that the explosion almost always happens. And when it does, Jenny is not only dealing with the original issue, she is also dealing with the fact that Sumit had time to tell her and chose not to. That difference matters, because bad judgment can be forgiven, but repeated secrecy starts to look like a pattern. This is why fans are not satisfied with a simple explanation like, maybe he needed the money. Because of course people need money for all kinds of reasons, and not every financial problem is a scandal. The real question is why a married couple that fought this hard to build a life together would ever reach a point where one person could feel out of the loop about a financial move this large. If the money was for both of them, then Jenny should understand why it was needed. If it was for Sumit alone, then she should still know how that choice affects their shared future. And if there was pressure coming from somewhere else, whether family, bills, business plans, or something viewers do not know, then that pressure becomes part of the marriage the moment it touches their finances. That is the piece fans cannot let go of. Because money may belong to an account, but the consequences belong to both people. Now here's where the story takes a sharper turn, because Jenny may not react the way viewers expect, and that is probably the part that keeps people watching her. Most people assume that if a partner discovers one more major secret after everything that has already happened, the obvious response is to walk away. But Jenny has never been predictable in that way. She has shown again and again that when a problem appears, her first instinct is often not to end the relationship but to fight harder for it. She may cry, argue, question Sumit, and say she is done with the chaos. But when the dust settles, Jenny usually looks for a way to keep the marriage alive. That makes this money issue much more complicated. Because fans may see a giant red flag, while Jenny sees another painful problem that she and Sumit are supposed to solve together. And that difference between Jenny and the audience is where the emotional tension gets really strong. Because viewers are not carrying the same investment she is. Fans can look at one event, compare it to the past, and say, that would be enough for me. But Jenny has spent years building meaning around the idea that this relationship was worth every sacrifice. She crossed borders, faced judgment, accepted family rejection, waded through uncertainty, and repeatedly told the world that love was bigger than the obstacles in front of them. if she suddenly decides that one financial secret proves the whole relationship is unsafe. She is not only judging Sumit's latest decision, she is also forced to look back at every old decision she made and ask whether she ignored too much along the way. That is a much heavier question than $20,000, because money can return, while lost years never do. This is also why people should be careful when they call Jenny weak. Because weak is not really the right word for someone who has made this many stubborn, difficult, unpopular choices and stood by them in front of millions of viewers. Jenny is actually extremely strong when she decides what she wants, but that strength has almost always been used to protect the relationship rather than challenge its foundation. She used it against people who criticized the age gap, against family members who thought the marriage would never work, and against every outside voice telling her to go home. The big test now is whether she can use that same strength inside the relationship if she believes Sumit crossed a line. Fighting the world for your partner is one thing, but fighting your partner for honesty is completely different, because there is no outside enemy to blame and no romantic story that makes the conflict easier to understand. That change matters, because Jenny and Sumit built a huge part of their identity around the idea that it was always the two of them against everybody else. When Sumit's family resisted the relationship, Jenny and Sumit could see themselves as the couple protecting their love from people who refused to understand it. When viewers questioned the age difference, they could say outsiders were judging something they could not feel from the inside, even when cultural pressure became overwhelming. They still had a clear emotional structure. Jenny and Sumit were together, while the problem lived outside the marriage. A hidden financial decision destroys that structure, because Jenny cannot stand beside Sumit against a problem he kept from her. Suddenly the question is not whether the world accepts them, but whether Jenny can trust the person standing next to her. And that is exactly where $20,000 becomes more powerful as a symbol than as a number. To one person it might represent a loan, a debt, a business move, or a desperate attempt to cover some problem before it got worse. To Jenny, if she was not fully involved, it could represent something much more personal, whether she has equal control over the life she helped build. Financial independence matters in every marriage, but it matters even more when one person moved into the other person's country and naturally depends on them more for language, local systems, banking, transportation, family connections, and day-to-day decisions. Sumit understands the environment around them in ways Jenny may never fully understand, and that gives his honesty extra weight. If he explains everything clearly, that difference can be manageable. If he starts deciding what Jenny needs to know and when she needs to know it, the same difference can become a serious source of imbalance. Now this is where the commentary gets uncomfortable for Jenny too. Because love can sometimes make people accept situations they would never recommend to somebody else. If Jenny watched another woman explain that her husband had a history of hiding major truths and had now made a large financial decision she did not fully understand, Jenny might tell that woman to slow down and demand answers. But when it is your own relationship, the rules become blurry because every mistake is attached to memories, affection, shared jokes, years of history, and the fear of losing something you fought very hard to keep. That is the emotional trap viewers recognize. Jenny may not be asking, is this behavior acceptable? She may be asking, is this behavior bad enough to erase everything we survived to get here? Those are not the same question, and they can lead to completely different choices. The more Jenny has sacrificed, the harder it can become to judge the relationship only by what is happening right now. Because every current problem is sitting on top of years of emotional investment. This is sometimes why people fight hardest for something when it is already costing them too much. Because walking away would mean admitting that the investment did not create the future they expected. Jenny has spent years proving the critics wrong, so another secret does not only challenge her trust in Sumit, it challenges the story she told herself about why staying was worth it. That is why fans should not expect one dramatic argument to suddenly change everything. Jenny's breaking point, if she ever reaches one, may not come from the size of a single mistake. It may come from realizing that the same type of mistake keeps returning under a different name. And if that realization happens, Sumit has a much bigger problem than $20,000, because he cannot repair a pattern with one explanation. He can explain where money went, why he made a choice, who pressured him, what he was afraid of, and what he plans to do next. But Jenny may still be left with the deeper question of why she was not included from the beginning. That question has followed their relationship in different forms for years. Why did she learn certain things later? Why did Sumit wait until pressure forced action? Why did he think delaying a painful conversation would protect the relationship? Every time that question returns, the answer becomes less important than the repetition. People can forgive mistakes, but it becomes much harder to forgive the feeling that they are always arriving late to their own life. This is where Sumit may actually deserve more complicated commentary than simply calling him a villain. Because fear can make people behave in destructive ways without turning them into monsters. He has spent years caught between Jenny, his family, social expectations, and his own desire to avoid hurting everyone at once. That pressure may have taught him a terrible survival habit. Tell each person enough to keep the peace, delay the hardest truth, and hope time creates a better opening later. It probably worked for him in small situations before Jenny ever entered his life, which may be why he keeps returning to it when stress rises. The problem is that marriage cannot work safely on partial information, because eventually one partner realizes they are not sharing the same reality. Sumit may think he is managing pressure, while Jenny experiences the same behavior as being excluded. And that difference between intention and impact is where many relationships break down, because people defend themselves by saying, "I did not mean to hurt you," while the other person is asking, "Why does this keep hurting me anyway?" Sumit may genuinely love Jenny, and Jenny may genuinely love Sumit, but love does not automatically correct a bad communication pattern. If anything, strong love can sometimes hide the pattern longer, because both people have more motivation to explain it away. Jenny can say Sumit was scared, Sumit can say he was trying to protect her. And both statements can be emotionally true while the behavior remains unhealthy. The test is not whether they can create another explanation. They have had plenty of explanations. The test is whether the next difficult truth reaches Jenny before she has to discover it. That is why the audience should pay less attention to a dramatic apology and more attention to what happens afterward. Because reality television loves a big emotional moment where someone cries, promises change, hugs, and says they are starting over. Those scenes can feel satisfying, but they do not tell you whether the real problem has changed. The proof comes later in boring moments when there are bills, family requests, uncomfortable choices, and information one partner knows the other will not like. Does Sumit bring Jenny into those conversations immediately, or does he still try to handle everything himself first? Does Jenny ask direct questions and insist on seeing the full picture, or does she accept reassurance because she wants peace? That is where the future of this marriage would actually be decided, not in one dramatic speech. There is also a reason fans keep returning to the exact amount, because $20,000 feels big enough to imagine consequences, but small enough to feel believable as the kind of decision someone might think they could fix quietly. If the number were unbelievably huge, everybody would assume the whole situation had to explode immediately. 20,000 sits in a strange middle space where one person might convince himself that he can solve the problem before his partner needs to know, especially if he is already used to hiding stress until he has an answer. That is what makes the theory so emotionally sticky. Viewers can imagine Sumit saying to himself that he will explain tomorrow, then next week, then after one more payment, until the delay itself becomes the biggest part of the problem. And here's another reason people are suspicious. Jenny and Sumit spent so long fighting for permission to live their relationship openly that viewers assumed honesty inside the relationship would eventually become the easy part. After all the secrecy surrounding family, marriage, and social pressure, the reward was supposed to be a life where they no longer had to hide important things from each other. That was the emotional promise of their story. They fought through chaos so they could finally have peace. If a major money decision now creates another secret, fans feel like they are watching the relationship return to the exact behavior it was supposed to outgrow. That is why the reaction feels bigger than the event itself. People are not only asking what happened with the money, they are asking whether all those years of struggle actually changed anything. The question for Jenny is even harder, because she has to decide what forgiveness should require this time. Forgiveness does not have to mean pretending the problem was small, and it does not have to mean returning to the same rules. Jenny could forgive Sumit while still demanding more control over finances, full access to information, and a clear agreement that no major decision happens without both of them. In fact, that may be the strongest version of Jenny viewers could see, because it would not require her to abandon the marriage she fought for, but it would require her to stop protecting the relationship from consequences. Sometimes the healthiest response is not leaving immediately or forgiving immediately. Sometimes it is changing the terms under which trust continues. That is what makes this situation more interesting than a simple Jenny versus Sumit argument, because the real conflict may be Jenny versus the pattern that has shaped their relationship from the beginning. Sumit is part of that pattern, but Jenny is also part of it because she has repeatedly accepted explanations and moved forward. That does not make her responsible for his choices, but it does mean both people would have to change if they want the cycle to stop. Sumit would have to speak sooner, and Jenny would have to make delayed truth more costly, instead of allowing love to erase the consequence every time. If only one of them changes, the old system can easily rebuild itself around the new promise. And this is where the fan reaction becomes almost a character in the story. Because viewers are tired of being told to look only at the latest crisis. They have watched long enough to recognize patterns, and once an audience recognizes a pattern, every new event becomes evidence in a larger case they are building in their heads. That is why some fans sound convinced that something deeper must be wrong, even when they do not have proof of another secret. They are not reacting to confirmed information. They are reacting to familiarity. The same emotional shape keeps appearing. Sumit feels pressure. Information gets delayed. Jenny learns something later than she should. There is an emotional confrontation, and then love becomes the reason they move forward. The danger of that cycle is that every successful reconciliation teaches the relationship that it can survive without changing enough. If Jenny always forgives and Sumit always promises, both of them may honestly believe the crisis is over. But the behavior that created the crisis may still be sitting underneath the surface. Then months or years later, a different issue triggers the same sequence. This is why long-term viewers are more skeptical now than they were in the beginning. They have already seen love survive. That is no longer the question. The question is whether love can create a different behavior. Because surviving the same kind of pain repeatedly is not the same thing as building a healthier marriage. That is also why I do not think the most dramatic possible explanation is necessarily the most interesting one. It would be easy to imagine some giant hidden scheme, secret family deal, or shocking betrayal behind the $20,000, but sometimes reality is more revealing when the answer is smaller. What if Sumit simply panicked, made a bad choice, hid it because he was embarrassed, and then waited too long to explain? That sounds less explosive, but it would tell us something very important about him, because it would prove the old conflict avoidance habit is still alive even after everything he and Jenny went through. A massive conspiracy would be shocking once. A repeated character flaw is dangerous forever. And for Jenny, that may be the realization that hurts the most, because she has always believed the obstacles were temporary. The family would eventually calm down. The legal problems would eventually get solved, the marriage would eventually happen, and the chaos would eventually turn into stability. She stayed because there was always another finish line ahead. But a behavior pattern does not have a finish line unless the person chooses to change it. If Sumit still hides difficult information because he is afraid of confrontation, there is no final victory where that problem disappears by itself. There will only be new versions of the same test. And Jenny will keep being asked to decide whether this time is different. So when fans say something feels seriously wrong, I think this is what many of them are really reacting to. Even if they cannot explain it in one sentence. They are watching a couple that finally got almost everything they said they wanted, yet the relationship still seems capable of producing the same kind of uncertainty that defined its early years. That feels unsettling, because the audience expected the marriage to be the solution. They expected choosing each other openly to end the secrecy, but if major decisions can still happen without complete communication, then the marriage did not solve the central problem. It only changed the setting around it. And now we reach the part that matters most. Because the $20,000 can be replaced, repaid, explained, or eventually forgotten. But Jenny cannot build a secure future if she believes important information might arrive only after Sumit has already acted. Trust is not simply believing that your partner loves you. Trust is believing that your partner will tell you the truth when telling the truth is inconvenient, embarrassing, or likely to start a fight. Sumit has never had much trouble telling Jenny he loves her. His harder test has always been telling her something he knows she does not want to hear. That is why this situation hits the nerve it does, because it appears to ask the exact question their relationship has avoided for years. But if the response becomes another cycle of partial explanations, defensiveness, emotional promises, and quick forgiveness without a real change in how decisions are made, then fans will have every reason to stay skeptical. At that point, the money itself almost stops mattering, because the real story becomes repetition. Jenny would still be fighting for the same thing she was fighting for years ago, the right to know the full truth before it changes her life. Sumit would still be trying to keep peace by delaying the conversation that creates the peace. And the audience would still be watching two people who clearly care about each other, but keep confusing love with protection from uncomfortable facts. That is why I keep coming back to one question, and I think it is the question that should decide how viewers judge this entire situation. Did Jenny get a choice before the financial decision was made? Or did she get an explanation after it was already done? Those are two completely different marriages. In the first marriage, Jenny and Sumit may be messy, impulsive, and financially stressed, but they are facing the mess together. In the second marriage, Sumit is still deciding when Jenny deserves the truth, and no amount of romance can make that healthy for long. The answer to that one question tells us far more than any rumor about where the money went. The most dramatic possibility is that the $20,000 leads to another major reveal. And that is obviously the theory that keeps viewers clicking, because people know this couple has delivered shocking turns before. But the more realistic and maybe more important possibility is that there is no giant hidden scandal waiting behind the number. Maybe the real problem is simply that Sumit still reacts to fear the same way he always has, by delaying difficult truth until he thinks he can control the outcome. If that is what happened, then the story is not less serious. It is more serious, because a secret scandal can end, while a habit follows you into every future decision until you confront it. That is where Jenny's next move becomes more important than Sumit's explanation. If she immediately accepts reassurance and moves on, viewers will probably see the same cycle they have been criticizing for years. If she asks for complete clarity, insists on understanding the finances, and makes it clear that love no longer means automatic forgiveness without change, then the entire balance of the relationship could shift. Jenny has spent years asking Sumit to choose her over outside pressure. Maybe now she has to ask him to choose honesty over his own fear of confrontation. That may sound less dramatic than another family showdown, but for this couple, it could be the hardest demand she has ever made. And Sumit's response would tell us everything. Because if he becomes open, accepts responsibility, and gives Jenny equal control over what happens next, then viewers may have to admit that people can learn from messy choices. But if he acts like the only problem is that Jenny found out, or if he tries to make the conversation disappear with another emotional promise, then fans are going to see the old Sumit immediately. That is the version of him who believes the truth is dangerous only because other people react badly to it, instead of understanding that the delay is what makes the reaction worse. Until he understands that difference, every secret will feel bigger than it originally needed to be. So when you strip away the rumors, the fan theories, the dramatic edits people imagine, and the endless arguments in comment sections, the heart of this story becomes surprisingly simple. Jenny gave Sumit years of loyalty because she believed the two of them would eventually reach a place where nothing important had to be hidden anymore. Sumit fought for Jenny because he said he wanted a life where they could finally choose each other without fear. If a major financial decision happened outside that shared trust, then both of those promises are being tested at the same time. That is why this one issue feels so heavy even before anyone knows every detail. And now I want to know where you land, because I think viewers are going to divide into two very clear camps. One side will say this was probably a bad financial decision made by a man who has always been terrible at facing conflict, and the secrecy came from fear, not some deeper plan. The other side will say the history is too strong to ignore, and that when Sumit delays important information, there is usually another layer that Jenny discovers later. If you think this is mostly a bad decision, write bad decision in the comments. If you think there is still a hidden truth behind the $20,000, write hidden truth. And tell me exactly what part of their history makes you believe it. Because after everything Jenny and Sumit have survived, The question is no longer whether their love is strong enough to survive one more crisis. We already know their love can survive an unbelievable amount of chaos. The real question is whether their marriage can finally become strong enough that chaos does not need to keep happening in the same way. If the answer is yes, then $20,000 could become nothing more than a painful lesson they eventually move past. If the answer is no, then fans may remember this as the moment one number exposed a problem that had been hiding in plain sight for years. Because with Jenny and Sumit, the most dangerous secret may never be the money itself, but the belief that the truth can always wait until tomorrow. This script is fictionalized commentary created for entertainment, and does not present unverified fan theories or accusations as established facts.